Litigation is a great vehicle for social change with respect to criminal justice.
I first hit the DYS system when I was 15, but I started committing crimes when I was 9.
But for a lot of our kids who come here, Carefree stopped at about 7.
I got a problem with authority, a big problem.
We need to continue to treat kids like kids and not like adult criminals.
People are leaving and coming right back. People are leaving and going into the adult system. People aren't getting what they're supposed to be getting out of this place. So where's the correction in the correctional facility?
They know the difference between right and wrong. We make the assumption that everybody knows the difference between right and wrong.
I realized that it ain't about how you start, it's about how you finish. I always promised my mom I was going to do right.
Since its founding in 1989, the Children's Law Center Incorporated has been protecting the rights of children and youth. In 2003, complaints surfaced that conditions for children detained by Ohio's Department of Youth Services, DYS, were unsafe and violated their constitutional rights. This started a 12-year legal battle. We hope that their story will inspire others to reform the systems of juvenile justice in other states.
Our system, this broken system that we talked about, wants to believe that as long as they know the difference between right and wrong, that's enough. And it really isn't. It begins the discussion. So having an understanding that they are children, they are our kids.
I reviewed a youth who is 14 years old, and he has a 6-year sentence. And I was struck by the enormity of the task that's in front of us.
They're in a system now that just says lock them up. There is really no rehabilitation.
Is we have to raise a 14-year-old till he's 20. And that is, that's scary for me.
And we say, well, where's the rehabilitation? How are we trying to change Johnny? Well, we're not trying to change Johnny, we're trying to punish Johnny. But Johnny is an immature, undeveloped kid.
When I first made contact with the system, I was 14, just turning 15. Now I'm 18, turning 19. Family life, my dad wasn't never around. My mom was a single lady, so I had 10 sisters and 2 brothers, so I was basically in the middle. When my mom passed away, I kind of didn't know what to do. I kind of put my mind back in negativity. I couldn't deal with it, so I kind of went back to the streets, and nobody really felt the pain I felt, so I had to take care of myself.
They certainly deal with more serious, significant family matters than most of us have seen in our adult lives.
You know, like, I love my mom. I really do. I love my mom. We were fighting 2-3 times a day, like fighting with each other, like yelling, screaming at each other and stuff. And I'm crying the whole time because I just can't stand it. I really can't stand it. But it's the only time that she's paying attention to me.
And so as we move more to an adult model, because we see young people with adult issues, we've lost that these are our children. And these aren't necessarily our children of the future, they're our children of right now.
I first hit the DYS system when I was 15, but I started committing crimes when I was 9.
I remember when I first saw her, right? She had her hair all braided down in like pigtails, so I'm like, aw, she kind of cute. She just like a little, no.
Currently, I'm in the 10th grade. I got expelled from school in the 9th grade, and that was part of my charge while I'm here. I got expelled out of school because of my charge.
Because once she opened her mouth, she all like hard and thug and stuff, and it's like, wait a minute.
A lot of people gave up on me. A lot of people give up on kids like me because hard-headed, don't like to listen. And I keep doing things over and over and over. It's like insanity. If you keep doing things, you get the same result. Why do you keep doing it?
They are not lost causes. They're not the monsters they may think that they are. They're deserving of more than locking up and forgetting about.
I think my anger comes from being abandoned from my father. Being abandoned by my father, him leaving me. because I used to be a daddy's girl.
It can be really difficult for youth not to have contact with their families.
My dad was a heroin addict. He'd be in and out of jail all the time, or he'll come over asking for money. And, you know, things just got really bad, and it was kind of like I didn't want him around anymore.
A substantial portion of the kids that I see here don't have a family visit from the time they get here to the time they leave.
Yeah, I think that's true, that if we do have somebody that keep in contact with us while we inside, like showing us that they care about us, supporting us, that we might do better.
The juvenile justice system at DYS soon revealed a culture of violence typified by the use of excessive force, isolation, and seclusion, failure to provide adequate medical and mental health care, inadequately trained staff, and a failure to provide programming and appropriate behavior interventions.
Ohio's just as bad as all the other states when it comes to serving juveniles. The entire system was unconstitutional, that there was cruel and unusual the way the youth were being treated, that there was excessive force applied against the youth, that there was no adequate education, that there was no adequate programming, that the youth were being over-incarcerated, they were being held way too long. And these were the problems that we had to solve.
The situation in the Ohio juvenile facilities, frankly, was horrifying.
The response from DYS has been to just lock them in their rooms. And some of those rooms are cells.
My name is D-E-R-R-I-C-K. I'm at Ohio River Valley Juvenile Correctional Facility. Here talking about the institution. This is my room, and this is where I am 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He only gave me 6 months. I've been in here 2.5 years. It ain't changed a thing. There's two ways of life. Being in the streets. See, the streets can take you out the game, or you get locked up. That's only two options you got.
There had been a very strong reliance in Ohio on using solitary confinement, not only for what they perceived as safety reasons, but also as punishment and for discipline.
There were children, young teens being put in solitary confinement as a punishment, sometimes for days or weeks or even months.
It's absolutely the worst thing that we can do to any human being, and it's a civil rights and a human rights violation.
I don't think it takes an expert to understand that taking a child away from their family, out of their homes, and putting them into a facility, and then putting them alone in a room is not only counterproductive, but it's just immoral.
We are locking kids down in inordinate numbers even today.
We see kids being charged with more serious offenses at younger and younger ages.
When I started litigating in Ohio in 1976, there were 12,000 prisoners in the adult system in 6 prisons. And now, of course, there are 14,000 guards.
Years ago, I would assume kids got detention or sent home or maybe to the principal's office. Nowadays, they get taken down to the county detention center and they're charged with assault and they face a loss of liberty.
So there is absolutely no relationship between incarcerating people and our crime rate.
The phenomenon that we commonly refer to as the school-to-prison pipeline has really hurt kids in the sense that what used to be normal adolescent behavior, what really still is normal adolescent behavior, is being criminalized more often.
We had way too many kids in facilities that were overcrowded. So the staff was recruited from population centers that only knew one way to take care of problems, and that is being tough.
Being violent they would deal with it. If you're aggressive, defiant, reluctant, anything in that manner, they're going to deal with it.
Staff was not well trained. Staff didn't know anything about adolescent development. Staff, just felt that you had to thump people in order to teach them a lesson.
And the JDC I was at, their use of force was, if you get an attitude, you're told to go back to your room. If you don't go back to your room, then they will put you in your room.
There were always a number of stories of broken arms, youth who were injured by guards.
You can get hurt, right? You honestly get hurt like that. Staff is straining us. Right. My hand been broken 3 times. Right here.
The use of force at ORV, it was a little extreme. It was like every other restraint. People was coming with broken arms. You'd rather get into a fight with a kid than get restrained by staff.
The only answer to all of this is to make sure you have the right kids in the facilities, to make sure that the staff that's treating the kids has proper training so that they know how to do things other than thump people, and put cameras up.
People have turned juvenile correctional facilities into young adult facilities. And we have to remember that teenagers and even preteens that we get need something different.
The adult model is about punishment and incarceration. The juvenile model was supposed to be, I believe, about rehabilitation, but it's morphed into incarceration and punishment. And so as it's morphed towards more adult-like, there's no counterpart, and that's why we have a broken system.
They don't even necessarily see prison as a bad thing. Sometimes we think that they see the juvenile system as preparation, like a training school for the adult system.
Where we don't even make this distinction between adolescence and adult. It's blurred, based on what did they do. Did they know the difference between right and wrong? We make the assumption that everybody knows the difference between right and wrong. And clearly they don't.
If you go to the special management unit at the facility in Franklin Furnace, you would think that you are in a Supermax prison. In fact, it is worse than Ohio's Supermax prison. Why? Because it's dark. And there are some of the cells that don't even have an outside source of light.
The level of educational programming was poor. Students were often denied a full school day, adequate teaching staff, and materials. Youth in isolation were educated by receiving worksheets passed under the door to complete in their cells.
My opinion is the only way these guys have any hope of functioning and being successful as adults is if they have skills they have learned, and you learn stuff when you're a kid in school. Or on that first trip was fairly depressing. Education programs were functioning, but just barely. The fellas in places like ORV already have a bunch of strikes against them just because they've come out of a place like ORV. To me, education is the key to any level of success these guys are going to have.
What came to our attention immediately was a history of and a pattern of abusive practices, including physical and sexual abuse by guards of girls.
Many of the guards are males, so that also led to great opportunity for abuse. There were stories of physical abuse of these girls, sexual abuse.
We encountered a number of young ladies, one young girl in particular who was 16, who had been sexually assaulted by a guard.
They're very vulnerable, they're trapped, they can't get up and walk out the door.
She was very mentally ill. She had been sexually abused herself.
It was very easy for certain staff to take advantage of that situation, and it really placed those youth in harm's way.
She was suicidal, and she was put in an isolation cell where she was forced to perform a sex act on a guard.
It's really important when you consider the fact that most statistics show that somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 75% of youth that are in a secure facility do suffer with some kind of mental illness.
One thing that we know about youth who are committed to DYS is that many of them may have developmental disabilities. They may be low functioning, low IQ level.
There's so much stigma even these days attached to mental health, unfortunately, that we see a lot of kids that aren't getting the appropriate treatment that they need.
The reasons why they make bad decisions, bad choices, does go to how the brain develops and when it develops.
None of us are completely mature. They say that your brain doesn't even fully mature until you're like in your 24 maybe.
And what we've learned is that the brain isn't fully developed usually into the mid-20s.
What we want to have are all community-based facilities, all the big places shut down or sold to somebody else, and treating kids in small, localized units.
I think what is going to be significant, though, as we move through the reform efforts is if we do move from few very large institutions for kids to many smaller local facilities, that is ideal for these youth.
A lot of our families have difficulty with transportation, and placing a child in a facility an hour and a half away, it might as well be 10 hours away because it's just as unreachable for that family.
How did we get to a place where we are building these facilities way out in the middle of nowhere? I mean, this just makes no sense. So the ideal is to have any treatment that you're offering real close to home.
The problems were real and severe. Most facilities were overcrowded, understaffed, and insufficient in such vital areas as safety, education, mental health treatment, and rehabilitative programming. In 2004, the class action lawsuit, the SH case, was filed on behalf of the youth.
I think that lawsuit good because that's making it for like we getting treated like somebody, like in the adult system, they don't get treated like nobody, you know what I'm saying? So I mean, I go for that.
A class action was necessary in the SH case because a case on behalf of one child wouldn't have fixed what was wrong there.
Well, the litigation was a really important part of Ohio's juvenile justice reforms, and I think it really was the cornerstone for a lot of other things to happen.
Litigation was an important part of the strategy because as the Children's Law Center got into these facilities, they realized that the problem was complex and was going to need a lot of resources from the state to bring the facilities into compliance.
Litigation is a great vehicle for social change with respect to criminal justice. And the reason is that you need some engine to get the public focused on the problem.
We challenged not only the conditions of confinement and how youth were treated, but we also challenged the fact that once young people were incarcerated in these facilities, it was often very difficult for them to get out.
When we entered into the SH agreement, we knew that these reforms were going to cost a lot of money.
To get those elected officials to the table on behalf of children who had no political clout of any kind required the catalyst of litigation.
It makes it a lot easier for the executive branch of government to go to the legislative branch of government with a budget in one hand, serving non-voters, serving people that voters don't like, and a court order in the other hand saying we have to do this.
In 2004, the Impact Fund jumped in to provide much-needed support to the Children's Law Center.
The Impact Fund is a legal nonprofit which has, for the past 25 years, provided support to advocates who are advancing social justice using litigation.
The Impact Fund helped us in a couple of ways. There were times during the litigation where we incurred expenses that we just simply hadn't anticipated.
This case is exactly the kind of case that we are interested in supporting.
The best example of that was when we went back into court to challenge practices around the use of solitary confinement. And so it enabled us to hire one of the best experts in the country, who was a psychiatrist by the name of Stuart Grassian, who really could look at the damage that had been being done with these children and help us to convince the state and the federal court that practice had to end.
We also really appreciated the fact that they were representing a group that had no access to power, no access to the courts, had no way to vindicate their own rights. And so we really look for the cases where no one else will step up and provide them the resources they need to vindicate their rights.
12 years later, the litigation has resulted in sweeping changes. The state has all but eliminated solitary confinement and the reliance upon heavy-handed measures for discipline and control.
The litigation has addressed the solitary confinement problem in an extremely effective way.
One other very significant change that I think I am most proud of is that system of rewards and incentives have made facilities statistically, have made them safer, have eliminated a lot of violence, and they no longer rely on putting kids in their room or in a special management cell for weeks and months and years sometimes.
As a result of the litigation, they reduced the amount of time that the youth were in seclusion by 90%.
You know, I no longer went into facilities where kids were telling me my food is being taxed by gang members. I was beaten up and my black eye is from a guard slamming me against a wall. Those are the things we used to hear.
Youth now have routine access to counsel and have opportunities to challenge the duration of and conditions of their confinement.
We also challenge the fact that young people, when they're incarcerated, need access to lawyers. And so there is a good system now of legal services that are available anytime that young people are incarcerated in those facilities.
What we fail to recognize is locking kids up in detention and committing them to DYS and sending them into the adult system. That's actually what's criminalizing the juvenile justice system, and providing them with counsel or their constitutional rights actually protects them and works towards better outcomes.
The youth finally had a voice themselves where they could come forward and ensure that they could speak up and protect their own rights within the facility.
There is a constitutional minimum that we tend to go below very often when it comes to incarcerating people, arresting people, convicting them with coerced confessions, with bad identifications, with excessive force. And it's up to civil rights lawyers to remind the majority that they're not allowed to do that.
Another benefit of the settlement is that staff are now receiving proper training.
You know, when I first got here, Hardest Felon showed me nothing but love. So they showed me love, I started rolling with them. They showed me love, I showed love back, and I started holding it down. It's crazy, though. You'll never understand unless you're in here.
I was just at a training for staff. They were all in the basement of a church, and they were learning new skills on how to verbally disengage and de-escalate when things are heating up.
I noticed one day that I was starting to forget that Daniel was on the unit, which meant he wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't getting angry at people. Anger is his major issue. And every time I went to get him to talk, he was smiling. And I thought, wow, this kid's changing.
These people are nice as heck here. The nicest people I've ever met in a long time in my life.
And they were thrilled to be able to learn more about how to work with youth through appropriate verbal de-escalation, through ways that would result in a more peaceful encounter.
By 2017, the incarcerated population had dropped from nearly 1,800 youth in 8 state institutions to an average of 478 in 3 state facilities and 4 small private locations. The focus now is on local, residential-based facilities.
Rather than being housed in prison-like institutions far from their homes, the programs are based in small residential facilities within their communities. Those facilities have appropriate mental health treatment, educational programming, and trained staff who can meet the needs of these youth.
I'm Renee Hagan. I am the Juvenile Justice Division Director for Lighthouse Youth Services, and I also serve as a Program Director for Lighthouse Youth Center at Paint Creek. The greenhouse was actually built from ground to completion by the boys and our staff, and now of course they're participating in all aspects of the greenhouse and are really enjoying it. We have, since the beginning of our existence, have been implementing a cognitive behavioral approach to working with offenders on what is called criminogenic risk factors. We kind of come from this belief that, you know, behavior comes from thinking, and that's when we're going to have the most lasting impact on behavior.
Educational opportunities, vocational practices, and mental health services are much improved and provide a more robust opportunity for youth rehabilitation.
There is a very different culture when you go to these facilities now.
You know, we're exploring the ability to use the arts a little bit to help kids that are interested in expressing themselves artistically, either by way of music or photography, to find positive outlets for that.
Kids are kept busy, they're kept productive with relevant and important sort of programming.
I would ensure that there were art outlets for kids to express themselves through painting, through sculpting, through drawing.
I was asked to paint a couple murals on our cottage before an audit to kind of give it a better look, more not so sterile. I was thinking to myself, like, I can't do big murals or paintings. I never did paintings before, so I was kind of hesitant about it. So finally, when they got me all the equipment, I started doing them. It was fairly easy once I started getting the hang of it, started doing that. I had a couple people help me do the paintings and stuff.
She came and talked to me. It was so funny because she'd be like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, that's on you.
They really turned out really good, and it really showed me that I do have a lot of talent and I can do something with it.
We've done some things that I think are very, very good, but I think there's so much left to be done, and you know, building that positive support around a child that finds themselves involved in our system can only help to move them forward in a positive way.
It was a lengthy battle, but the success of this case can be used as a template by advocates and policymakers to reform the systems of juvenile justice.
Now that the SH case has been completed, it can be a blueprint for advocates in other states who want to take on the conditions in juvenile facilities.
We're improving the programming within DYS tremendously so that there's a better chance that kids will actually get educated, get sex offender treatment, get drug treatment, and all of that's on the upswing.
Now that the case is over, I absolutely feel like it's a success.
Strong focus is now placed upon re-entry into society, starting from the time the youth come into DYS, and includes the engagement of families and communities throughout the youth's stay. The future looks much brighter for these individuals.
I no longer feel it's going to be hard for me to control my violent behavior because I've done it so long in here. Once I decided to change myself, I created a new mindset for myself where I decided I don't want to take that violent path anymore.
I think education is very important. I plan on going to college. I plan on doing it all.
My dream when I get out, like, my dream is to get rich, die trying, but the right way. No commit, no crime.
I just want to be able to help instill hope into people, and that helps like show people that there's a different way than, you know, leading this kind of life.
I realized that it ain't about how you start, it's about how you finish. So If I started negative, I could end positive.
I never want to come back to DYS because it's so hard to get out of the system. I never, ever, ever want to come back to DYS.
When I get out, one of the first things I'm going to do is go show my family I love them and show them that I made it. I made it through the program.